Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. We're going to take a few minutes to let folks join the room before we start talking about going beyond legacy ETL. So while folks are joining, if you can share where you're joining from in the chat, it's always really fun to see where folks are located. A lot of different time zones here. It may not be even just morning or afternoon for folks. Um, uh, really excited to have folks join from so many far-flung locations. So we'll get started. I'm your host, Nina. I'm a staff developer relations engineer at Unstructured. And I've been at Unstructured for about a year now, previously working across startups and venture capital, largely within natural language processing and language modeling. And I'm joined today by Robert.
Hey, I'm an engineering manager here at Unstructured. I've been in the engineering space for about 15 years. I've only been here at Unstructured for about 6 months, but I've contributed heavily in helping manage the release of all the different connectors. So Nina kindly invited me here to discuss them, and I'm going to hand it over to Roman, who's been more involved than me.
Hey guys, yeah. So I've been an engineer for over a decade now. I think I was employee 13 at Unstructured, so I've been here for the long haul. Very integral to a lot of our connector work. You'll see my name all over our open source ingest repo, as well as how we leverage that in our platform product. So glad to be here. Glad to answer questions. Nina?
Yeah, great to have you two join. It'll be really interesting to get more insights from you on our own connectors after we talk about the comparison of the landscape overall. So today we're going to talk first about just what unstructured is for any of you who are not familiar. Then we'll talk about why data connectors are critical for GenAI in particular, compared to maybe how traditional ETL has been set up. We'll go through the critical criteria that we use to evaluate GenAI connectors. And then we'll show a live demo of how our connectors work in our whole platform in an end-to-end workflow. And then after that, we'll do a Q&A where you're welcome to ask questions about the presentations or questions about our connectors or product overall. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So in the chat, you can share, where you're joining from and any other chat content. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box. That's where we're going to be looking to answer questions either live or in writing. We will share a recording to your email after we wrap up. And if you're interested in learning more, you can schedule a guided proof of concept with our team afterwards. And so Unstructured is a Series B startup. We were started 2.5 years ago when GenAI was really starting to take off. This was around the launch of ChatGPT, which was the first popular GenAI product that really reached large market appeal. And so we have a lot of use across a number of companies in our open source and our enterprise products. So if you're familiar with it, give a shout. And how we got to where we are today is by seeing this kind of rat's nest that people end up creating when they're trying to do ETL, especially for GenAI. This is something that most of us saw in our previous organizations before joining Unstructured, and it's certainly what Brian saw before he joined as well, or before he started it as well. And so you end up with a lot of different packages, let's say, starting with just file transformation, and that's where our open source and version 1 of our API we're focused on. And then you end up kind of expanding the rat's nest as you're adding the other steps that you need to properly leverage your data within GenAI. So for document cleaning, chunking, embedding, and then of course the connectors on both the side of the systems of record and your downstream connectors where you're accessing the data. And so unstructured fits very neatly right in between your systems of record and your databases in this full pipeline where you would follow that with observability and retrieval and connect it to your large language model. And we're doing this via providing effortless ETL. We have this assembly line that takes your data, extracts it from your systems of record, partitions it, chunks it, enriches it, embeds it, and then loads it to your destination connector. And so these different steps include integrations from a number of third-party providers as well, so that we can instantly leverage new advancements that come out in the field without it taking a long time to integrate them. And so when we're going to talk about the data connectors that we have, we've really focused our study here on the ones that we think are most critical for GenAI. So we're comparing unstructured connectors to AirByte, Fivetran, and Boomi. They have tons of connectors. They have hundreds of connectors. We're probably going to get to 100 or so soon, but it's not really about the number. It's about what they do, especially for GenAI. And so we've really focused on unstructured data, unsurprisingly. So our sources are things like cloud storage, collaboration platforms, business applications, communication platforms, document storage, a lot of different places where the data is not structured at all. In addition to databases, because within GenAI, you're going to want your structured data and unstructured data to live together in one place and be accessible from one location, or multiple, but to have it all be consistent. And then on the destination side, we have created connectors for vector stores, search, cloud storage, and then traditional databases. We have a lot of specialized vector databases as well as graph databases. As far as I'm aware, we're the only provider that can instantly transform data in cloud storage and put it into a knowledge graph without any additional steps that you would have to take. And so this was our comparison here. So on the left is our list of sources, and then we looked for which of these connectors were provided by AirByte, Boomi, or Fivetran. In some cases, they just don't have them, or in other cases, they may have a different version. For the same company, they may have a different product, or they may have something that's in beta or REST only or a light version. So we annotated all of that so that you could really have all the information that you would need to compare these different providers. And so, for example, let's say like AirByte might have more of some of the sources that we have, but they might be missing something like, Discord and Outlook that are going to be providing, maybe more informal chat or email information that, can often be like the backbone of a company's information. I've definitely heard folks reference that like everything that all of their company information is in Slack, for example. And so I'll turn it over to Rob to kind of, share more insights into our source connectors.
Yeah. One of the things that many people have asked or talked about in the past are like, hey, why, I don't know. Source connectors are one of those things where there's a large variety of the different kinds of data that you could get from them. And because of that sheer variety, there's also like a hosting variety. So my sort of like canonical example of this would be a SQL database. Sure, you can host a Postgres database locally, but what kinds of data that you have in there are highly variant, and also where it's hosted at. So you might be able to prove out for yourself for a proof of concept and extract data from a Postgres instance locally. But then you also have to become an expert in it's being hosted if you actually want to manage that long term. Because many times you're going to have to work with a cloud provider and figure out how to have it run over there. And if you don't do that, then you have to figure out the authentication methodology that they use in each of those different cloud providers, and not just how it works for you and your proof of concept. You have to have it work in production with whatever the common thing that you want to have work there. So that's one of the views of my complexity of source connectors. What are your thoughts, Roman?
Thanks. I guess some topics I wanted to like highlight, I guess, in this is, first off, most of our connectors itself, you can actually see in our open source repo. Most of the root is there. And you'll notice if you look through it, we've tried to take an approach which is very kind of robust. And you'll notice there's some patterns in connectors where there's, ones like blob storage, like S3, which is just a file. And that's great because our API handles files no matter what. But then there's things like SQL databases, NoSQL databases, where you obviously, especially when you're at scale, you don't want to be reading every row in a table at a time. So we have patterns to optimize things so we don't hit like things like rate limiting. And then something that's really cool about our approach is there are sources that don't have a structure, don't really have a file associated with it, such as Confluence, Jira, where it's just like data there. And with our connectors, what it allows you to do is convert it into a file format that is optimized for our partitioning, for downstream processing. So really, we can kind of handle anything you want. Like this is just what we've built out so far, but there's really no source that we theoretically could pull from. And it's great because we have a very robust backbone to our code.
Yeah, that's really great. And yeah, having these be in the open source can be really helpful for folks to understand what we're doing. And we've also collaborated on a number of these with folks at the companies that create them. And then we take over and we make sure that they're standardized and meeting all the same features as our other connectors. And then we take on the maintenance there. So a lot of these were also built with expert collaboration, which has been really useful. I also want to note that there's a blog that covers all of this, and I'll share a link after the talk to that blog. But if you wanted to if this is a kind of a small font and you want to take a look later, that information is out there. And then on the destination side, you'll see that traditional ETL providers that were not built for GenAI or with GenAI in mind have even fewer of these, and they have maybe more of the more structured ones. And that's again because they're not able to transform that unstructured data in the same way and with the same flexibility that unstructured can. And so here we have databases that we support that require something like vector embeddings within the database. And so those are all steps that we have in our workflow. And I'll turn it over to Rob to share more thoughts on our destination connectors.
Yeah. You were mentioning about how we've had expert collaboration because we have open source. So like there's a number of these different connectors where we actually had them involved, and you have to especially for these like newer ones, it's really helpful to have the companies or the people who are making it help you figure out how to make the connector for it, because they're so new and so little information out there on how we even go about it. And then we internally have layers of test suites that we've been putting on top of these things to ensure that they don't break on us. Because that is a challenge if you don't go through the trouble of ensuring that over time as you need to do maintenance, you're going to eventually have your hand-rolled integration break on you. Anything you want to stack on top of there, Roman?
Yeah, I guess some like cool aspects about how we at least handle destination connectors is we do a lot to make sure like it's as dumbed down as possible without breaking. And you can imagine, considering that we have unstructured data, like there's never a guarantee of what the schema might look like by the time you upload it. And given the fact that we're uploading it to a lot of like schema enforced destinations, we make sure to put in the effort to dynamically manipulate stuff so that it fits in that schema that you have set yourself. Or if you have anything set, we'll do it for you. Like we just recently started introducing logic to create the destination for you if you don't have one set. So we kind of handle all this complexity and just hide it from you. Like you don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's a very cool aspect of our product.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very cool.
I think we call that feature talking about opinionated writes, Roman, right?
Yep.
Yes, and we'll get to that one soon as we talk about the different features that we focused on for our comparison. So we look at 8 different domains: data synchronization, schema flexibility, access and security, scalability, error handling and monitoring, metadata management, data quality and transform, and cost efficiency. We found that these were what were most important for folks that we knew or worked with that were implementing GenAI in production. And so this is the overall domains, and then we'll go into the specific criteria and then the results. So some of the features that we thought were most important, and therefore the ones that we implemented, were things like change detection intelligence. So that's probably one of my favorite features. It lets you sync only new or changed data within a page. And so, I've always heard that, it's so easy to just get all your data transformed once. That's fairly straightforward. But if your company data is changing, it's gonna be really expensive to run everything again when 1% or a fractional percentage of your files changed. But if you don't update what changed, that's going to also be really costly because you're gonna have outdated information. And so developing all of the infrastructure to handle that change is something that we spent a lot of effort on. And then we also track that on the destination side, since we're an end-to-end pipeline. And then we update those embeddings as well, and those entries, so that you don't have duplicate data, because that's even more dangerous if you have old information and new information in the same database that you're using in your GenAI workflow. Something that we have as an NVPC offering is event-driven updating. If the change detection is not enough, the change detection, you could set your workflow to run every 15 minutes, and it would catch anything that was new. But if you wanted even further granularity, or just to run it when new files were updated, event-driven processing is really important. Streaming data, we support in VPC, and then batch data for bulk ingestion. Vector embedding syncing, meaning that we are creating that embedding and then uploading it to your vector database. And then, as Roman mentioned earlier, opinionated writing, we're setting up your destination connector with the right schema and embedding dimensions. That's something that we have started with a few of our destination connectors, and we'll be rolling out more fully. And then for schema flexibility, we have both dynamic schema support, so we're compatible with structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. And then we also can handle changes in your source schema without breaking your downstream pipelines. And so what we've found is that 80% of enterprise data is unstructured. And so that support for unstructured data is really critical to get information into the destinations most relevant for GenAI. Access and security is super important. So we have a number of different features like role-based access control, authentication, data encryption, and security metadata to help support who can access the platform that the data is on, who can access that data once it's in your RAG system. And then we're making sure your data is encrypted. And we also offer in VPC and on-prem deployments for even further security measures. For scalability, we can scale horizontally, and also we have very massive concurrency for running multiple jobs at once per customer. And then for error handling and monitoring, retry mechanisms are really important, especially once you have LLMs and GenAI within your pipeline. You're going to get failures, and they're just going to cause a lot of headache down the line if you don't have mechanisms to account for that and to correct for that. And in addition, we share logs for the errors that you might get within the platform. Something that we've kind of really focused on strongly from day one has been metadata management. So one is making the metadata propagate from wherever your source was, wherever that initial file that you ingested is, through to the destination, and then it will be searchable. It will be indexed along with the document elements that we partitioned. So on the right here, we have an example like page where we would partition that you have a title here, narrative text here, an image here, a table here, and then that's what we're outputting in the JSON. And in addition, for each section of JSON, we have a ton of metadata, like the file name, the page number, base64 encoding of images, tables as text as HTML, and then about like 30 plus metadata fields, depending on the file type and the connector, or and the source location or file type. We take data quality and transformation very seriously. So as I mentioned before, with our change detection, we're also doing deduplication, making sure that you're not writing the same record again or a slight modification of that one. We're standardizing your data so that it's all in the same format in the end, no matter how what format or structure it came in as. And we also offer multiple transformation strategies. So in this example input page here, we have a page that has text, an image, and a table. And you really don't want to be throwing a VLM at text, at plain text. That's not very cost effective. And so we are using OCR for that. We are using image captioning or description via an LLM for images. And then we have a table processing model to process that table. And so after going through these multiple pipelines, we combine all of this and have your chunked embedded data with your metadata in the output ready to be staged for the destination. And we also have an auto pipeline, and that will decide for you which strategy makes the most sense at a page level. So you don't have to figure that out for yourself. And then we also have transparent and scalable pricing models. So for our platform, we have a kind of pay-as-you-go option, and then we have a subscribe and save if you want to contact our sales team. And then here's our comparison. So as I mentioned, these were kind of the key features that we are most excited about. Some of these are currently in beta in our internal testing environment and will be released more widely soon. And some of these are available in VPC only. And here we have compared to other providers, and we've delineated which features are available out of the box without any need for any configuration by the user, which is how we set up all of our features to be, versus some of these other providers will require additional steps, additional setup. Maybe you'll have to write some code to be able to have some of these steps within that ETL flow, since it wasn't designed for GenAI. And so we've added that differentiation because as we found out, once you start adding all those custom pieces in and one-offs, you end up with this rat's nest that's really difficult to maintain. And so, for example, some things are pretty common, like authentication and data encryption, batch data, and then other features may be pretty variable. Some may be pretty unique to unstructured, like in this comparison, the support of unstructured data, like really full support of many unstructured file types. And then others may be kind of variable between what those other ETL providers have focused on. So yeah, that's the comparison we did for these different factors. Again, this is available in the blog that I'll share a link to later. And then Rob, is there anything that you'd like to add color on any of these features?
I'm just going to reiterate that I really like opinionated rights. It is incredibly annoying to have to figure out what exactly you need to set up your schema to be for some of these destination connectors. And then if you have a source that changes the metadata associated with that, you need to tweak it in some way. Super nice to have that just automatically changed and for you. What about you, Roman?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about this slide for a long time, but some things I'll kind of throw out that are really cool is we also we do a lot, and this folds into the whole connector conversation. We do a lot in detecting what type of errors we might run into, because if a user maybe put in the wrong password, we don't need to retry that more than once because that's a user-based error versus maybe their service is actually down and that is something that we can retry. So it's like we do a lot in terms of detecting that and kind of saving costs on like, and especially like throttling and rate limiting, where do we hit them over and over again because it's broken on their side, or is it like, oh, we kind of messed up, user put something in wrong, let's not, and report it to the user. So that's just like one kind of facet that I think is really cool. This kind of gets more into like the weeds of like how we actually do our stuff, but all of our info pretty much is like scale 0. So you're never really, just by using our product, like you're not paying for anything until you absolutely have to. So we do a lot in making sure that like you're literally only paying for the files that successfully get processed, and then you see them in your destination.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think the opinionated writing is so crucial because, you know, I've sponsored a few hackathons on behalf of Unstructured, and the number one challenge I see is that someone may have set up their embedding dimension to be one dimension, and then something else in their workflow, and then it's not writing to the destination. And so based on that kind of experience, we have created this opinionated writing feature to make that soon to be an error of the past. So yeah, now that I've kind of talked about all the different features, I'm going to share what this all looks like in the platform. So on our platform that's available for anyone to try, we have a lot of information on the start page for looking at documentation or joining the community. And then one of our main features is our connectors. And so here we have the connectors that we've kind of brought in from our API and our open source, where all of our connectors live on the source side and the destination side. And you would just pick your connector, give it a name, and add your credentials. So for example, I have let's say I have an S3 directory. I just put in the bucket URL and then the AWS key and the AWS secret key, and that's all you need to get access to that. And then, for example, for the destination, for the workflow, I set up a AstraDB connector. So I put in my collection name and my API endpoint and my token. So it's super easy to set up. It took me like maybe a minute or two just to get this information, because on this pane on the right here, we have all the exact information on what you would need to fill in this API endpoint and token. We also have information about setting up the connector for the embeddings. And then we also have a link to the full documentation. You know, maybe if something went wrong, maybe some of your permissions weren't set in a way that would allow access, that full documentation will give you additional steps and help troubleshoot. So setting up these connectors is often the tricky part because, you know, I think the source connector providers, they're really trying to protect your data. And so they don't want it to be too easy to get access to it. So you've got to get the credentials and permissions just right. So let's say for this demo, I have an S3 bucket with the US Constitution in it. And then I have a AstraDB database I want to put that into. And then for I'm using the auto partition strategy, which will decide which approach of the different transform strategies that we have to take. I'm not selecting reprocess all, because if I wanted to run this again, let's say I wanted to repeat it every 15 minutes, that would enable it to just pick up only the new files. And so I complete this workflow, and then I can click run, and then it will show up in my jobs here. It's just getting started. I'll give you a quick look into our DAG in the workflows. So I just did a quick, basically a quick start, just getting the partitioning kicked off and running. But there's a lot of different settings that you can select if you wanted to customize further. So you can choose a fast strategy for simpler files, or high res where OCR might work well, or VLM, and then select your model here. And we're constantly bringing more into the mix. We have additional enrichments that we provide here. So for example, in this kind of default flow, there's an image summarization and a table description. You can choose your provider for this. You can also switch that to, for example, table to HTML, or you can do named entity recognition and have a custom prompt for how you want that metadata added to your output. And then for chunking, you can have different strategies, change your parameters. We have this contextual chunking feature that's pretty awesome that is only available if you contact our enterprise team to turn it on. That's one that does require an additional step, unlike the rest that just come out of the box. And then you can choose your embedding options between Azure OpenAI, Amazon Bedrock, Together AI, and Voyage AI, and we're bringing new ones around almost every week. You can choose, code embeddings, finance, law, multimodal embeddings, and then you can have multiple sources, multiple destinations. And if we go back to our job here, that finished running, and that shows us all the different steps. So the file got partitioned, all those steps that I just showed in the DAG. It shows the progress of that file, and then it got loaded to AstraDB. And so, for example, this is what you get at the end. You can look at the JSON view within your AstraDB instance or whatever destination you're using. And then you would see the vector with our contextual chunking. We have this prefix here that tells you which section of the document that came into. We're talking about chunking in more depth next week, next Wednesday, if you want to hear more about that specifically. And then the text, and then the metadata here. So we have the element type, file name, and additional metadata. And then the element level metadata can also be optionally preserved. So yeah, that's our platform. We'll jump to the Q&A, and up here I have some links if you want to try a no-cost guided proof of concept or just get started using the platform today. And now I will jump to the Q&A pane and then start answering some of the questions that folks have added to the chat. Okay. So first question from Ken. After you extract and enrich data into structured, especially financial data, what GenAI/LLM tools are out there to do the appropriate prompting? Who is doing the business/semantic layer well? Interesting. I'm not as familiar with which LLM might be best for financial data or prompting. I think maybe if you want to reach out to our sales team, they may have a little bit more familiarity with maybe some tools that they've heard of on that space. I don't know if Rob or Roman, you're familiar with any specific tools after the destination connector.
This is after the destination or before the destination to enrich it?
I took that as a yeah, after the destination. Thanks for clarifying, Ken.
Are you basically talking about toolkits, Ken, for making RAG interfaces?
Yeah. And chatbots and stuff. I am familiar with, for example, a product called Onyx. We did a webinar with them a few weeks ago. That's production deployable RAG in a box. It's not finance specific, but it is something that kind of lets you, I think also similar to Unstructured, it lets you try different LLMs, for example, to see which is going to be the most useful. And then a question from Cameron, which OCR do you use? I just blanked on this one. Roman or Rob? Tesseract?
I think it's Tesseract.
Yes, Tesseract. We kind of have built on top of Tesseract. So we have that in addition to, for example, our own object detection models that we're using to kind of augment that from just being like a straight OCR step to being a partition step that has additional information. Let's see, question from Nicholas. How can you use the unstructured workflow with a multi-tenanted database? Can you make sources and destinations dynamic?
So would this be like the user associated with the unstructured account? Because I'm trying to understand like the use case of this. Because usually when you create like a connector, you'll have credentials you associate with that connector. So theoretically, you can create multiple connectors pointing to the same source or destination that have different credentials associated with it and use those in a pipeline. Does that at all handle your situation?
Yeah, Nicholas, if you have a further question, please add it to the Q&A. I have a question for Rob and Roman, or Roman. What would you say has been like one of the biggest challenges in building these connectors or specific features?
Yeah, I guess this is where pretty much everything in between the source and destination we have more control over because it's internal or the plugins. The destinations and source, each one is its own kind of type of connection. So the stuff that we use for, I don't know, Postgres doesn't obviously apply to S3. So every time we introduce a new connector, we have done a lot to try to generalize as much of the process as possible, but there's just no way around the fact that whenever we introduce a new one, it's look into what SDKs they support, look into any limitations they might have. For example, there's one vector database that has a very hard limit on how much you can upload, whereas others don't. So for example, for that one, we need to add a little bit more logic around how we upload it than others. So again, we try to do as much as we possibly can, generalize it to make the process easier, but there's just no way around the fact that each connector has its own like SDK associated with it. Sometimes they don't even have an SDK associated with it, so we have to write our own client for it. And there's just no way around that.
Yeah, I'm gonna stack on there that also we do some verification steps right along the way because we try to make pipelines. We're like, oh, how many files succeed in getting to the destination? And some of these systems use probabilistic counts at the end, where it's not actually, it's an estimate of how many. And that has made thrown a wrench in sometimes in the throughput time for us to try to get there. So yeah, that's one of the challenges, I'd say.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, we have another question in here from Isaiah. I work in the mortgage industry and our product helps to automate the quoting process for loan officers. To do this, we need to parse rate sheets that are in the form of PDF documents so that we can calculate pricing for different loan scenarios. PDFs are unstructured and difficult to get data from. So until recently, we've been pushing for XLSX files for parsing, but I feel like your product may help with this use case. Can you please share info on how this process could work? Yes, this is exactly the kind of scenario that Unstructured was designed for. So you can take your PDFs and just put them into one of our source connectors, and soon we'll have a local file upload available as well and a playground to kind of see what these different steps look like. We'll do another webinar to showcase that in the next few weeks or so. But in the meantime, you can just throw them into S3 or something, and then we'll extract the data. So let's say if you have rate sheets that have tables in them, we'll extract that table as HTML. And for example, in our webinar last week with Elastic, they did a demo where they set up RAG and they had tables within a file. It was a really fun research study on stolen teaspoons, and it had a number of tables in it, as a research study often might. and then they were able to just ask queries of that file, including the tables. And so basically you can just set up the RAG that would have these different settings. And I think, I think like lately there's been a trend maybe moving beyond RAG. RAG is just being able to answer questions or ask questions to something like report generation. And to me, I kind of see RAG as an intermediate step. So say you have like a standard formula for calculating that pricing, you can kind of build that into a workflow and then have your documents ingested. They're in your vector database. Now you've built, your own kind of queries from there in your RAG or report generation process. So I hope that's helpful. You're welcome to reach out to our enterprise team as well, and they can kind of help with the proof of concept around your specific use case as well. And I also want to mention, that our enterprise team is supported by an amazing team of solutions architects. So if there's kind of like, we kind of offer this like basic platform that is meant to capture a lot of the essentials for the workflow, but then almost, every enterprise customer we see, they say like, oh, we'd like to have this additional step in the pipeline. And our solutions engineers can very quickly build those up. And soon we'll also have plugins available within the platform that make that customization even easier. We have that available now through Enterprise as well. Question from Nicholas. How can we leverage Unstructured's workflow to dynamically configure both our source and destination connectors based on tenant-specific settings? For example, is it possible to parameterize the S3 remote URL and AstraDB key space/collection using environmental variables or a configuration service so that each tenant's data remains isolated? I'll throw in one point before I turn this over to Roman or Rob. In addition to the UI that I showed, we also have a platform API. We're actually going to announce the launch of that next week. And so that's an API that lets you do everything I showed in the demo programmatically. So that will go toward the parameterization that you asked about. And then Roman or Rob can answer a bit more.
We don't currently support that in terms of like dynamically changing the essentially input value of say like an S3 bucket or collection and whatnot. But I personally would love to hear like more about the use case. It's something that like maybe others have that as a need. And it's something that we can take into account. But as of right now, we don't support that.
Yeah, I think the platform API approach for dynamically passing in, that would be the best solution. And then maybe having a S3 bucket that you dispatch out where you have some sort of thing that sorts there on your own side to say, oh, this came from this one thing. You flip back and forth between, you have some sort of script or something like that that puts it into separate buckets. But we don't have anything inside a platform right now that would do that for you automatically. I will say, like Nina was talking about, we do have various kinds of custom plugins that if you wind up going with platform, especially if you want to have it deployed in VPC, you get a lot of variety of possibilities there. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all, Nina.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having it be in VPC and using platform API and potentially a little bit of solution engineer magic could be all you need for that to work the way that you need. Question from Karsten. How does Unstructured let a pipeline owner know about any issues of the pipeline? A step fails or takes longer than expected. So I've definitely seen some variance in like how long my jobs take to run. Like for example, the one that I just ran, I think is the same one. It's the same pipeline I ran on the 28th. It took 56 seconds. Now it took 1 minute and 14 seconds. So, steps can take longer. And that is just something that like, it still generally happens pretty quickly. So, and I think it, that's kind of part of the retry mechanism. Like it might take longer, but it's still happening. So you wouldn't really need to think about that unless like you have some kind of like real-time constraints. So I would say currently, we don't really have a way to let users know if a step takes longer. However, if a step fails, you would get on the side pane here, you would have a failure for that particular step. And then here where this says error 0, you would have an error message there that would point you to what happened in that pipeline. We're still working on increasing the observability of the error information you can get right here. You're going to get that first error, but not the full stack. But then there's this button called that says request help. And then if you push that button, it will send an email to support, and we have 24/7 support. And then someone will email you all of your logs. And so that will kind of be like the full amount of information that you would get around a step failure. Oh, question from Isaiah to contact. That was the sales and solutions team. So I'll just type the sales at structured.io. And it's also, you can also fill out the form on this enterprise link I have here. That's basically the same thing. A question from Carson, can I set a webhook? And that's around the earlier question about any issues or slowdowns in the pipeline.
So on the SaaS side and the platform API side, no. But we do have OTel if you have it in VPC, and those could be relayed to whatever your downstream logging solution is. And so if it has webhooks, then sure. It's an interesting idea, though. Anything you want to add there, Roman?
No, that's about, I mean, yeah, we don't natively support it yet, but yeah, it's a good idea.
And then let's see, we had a few pre-submitted questions as well. Let me see where I have those. I'll just grab them, I think, in my Slack. Just one sec. Or maybe if someone can share it, maybe Aaron, if you can share it in the chat. Oh, and I opened the chat and I see a few questions in here. So I'll answer those first. So let's see, there's a question, how do you protect against indirect prompt injection? That might have been around maybe the prompt that I showed for NER, for the custom prompting there. So I guess Robin, Roman, not exactly your connector domain on that step. I'm not sure if you have any insights.
I do know we have some logic around like the data that you provide in the UI is not just directly like pass through to what we pass to like the model. There is some logic that takes that data, just kind of like maps it to something that will abide by the contract that we are trying to enforce for stuff downstream of that. So I think in that logic, we probably introduce some of this kind of like protection around just like either something that you may have messed up or injection.
Yeah, I think this is going to become our friend. I think I want to know more about what kind of thing you're thinking about as far as like indirect prompt and injection. Like, are you concerned about a file that you're processing, attempting to prompt inject something? So that's what more details would be great.
Agreed. And there's another question from Tanya in the chat that I just noticed. How do you address the challenge of data drift and ensure the ongoing accuracy and relevance of the data fed into GenAI, especially as source data evolves? So I did cover this earlier, but I think it's a really important a step to, or something to foot stomp, because it is such an integral part of what we do and why we were designed for GenAI in particular. And that's that as your data is updating, as your source data is updating, you can rerun your workflow and only process that data that updated. And then we're also updating it on the destination side so that you don't have duplication there. So this is really like, this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, in applying GenAI to your own data, is that, you know, our data, our Notion, our Slack, our documents, they're changing, you know, hundreds of times a day. And so it's really important to have that up-to-date information. And so, for example, in that workflow that I showed here, the demo workflow, you can set a schedule. So let's say repeat every 15 minutes. And so you could run the same flow every 15 minutes, and only the files that changed or new files are going to get updated, and they will get updated without any duplication. So yeah, and then we'll go to a few questions that were submitted beforehand. So there was one question, can we convert different layout formats of PDFs into structured data? And so, yeah, that's something that like Unstructured probably spent their first year of existence on. I wasn't there yet, Roman was, but there was training, a lot of training on getting the reading order right and having a wide range of layouts that we were able to process and also gather metrics on. Roman, not sure if you want to add to that since you were there back then.
We again, this gets into like we have an entire ML team that specifically focused on this sort of stuff. I was not part of that team, but as Nina said, like that was like the core use of our product when we first started. So there was a ton of use for like, yeah, getting as robust of a detection model as possible for all these layouts and stuff like that.
Yeah. And oh, a few questions coming in now from the Q&A and the chat. So a question from Kevin, how can you handle videos? So that's something that we don't support right now, but that's going to be coming pretty soon. Both audio and video support are in our near-ish term roadmap. And a question from Atenya, if a second question is allowed. Yes, you're all allowed to ask as many questions as you'd like. How do you handle the scalability of your solution to accommodate large volumes of unstructured data and the computational demands of GenAI? So we covered some of that as we talked about some of the features that we provide. So we have both horizontal scaling of the instances that we're using to process this, and then we're doing a lot of concurrency. So for example, in my demo, I like to just run my demo with just one file because, you know, it'll run pretty quickly. And, you know, that file takes about a minute for all the different steps, including embedding, which is often the longest one. And then the last time I ran about 1,000 files with the VLM partitioner, that took about 30 minutes. And those files were like 30 to 50 pages long. And this was like a month ago. So we've gotten faster since then. And so we actually have like additional quotas with some of these VLM providers, actually with most of them, because the volumes that we're handling for customers are so high. And so our SaaS product has really strong scaling and concurrency. But if that, you know, if your demands are even higher than that, then you can contact our enterprise team and they can work with you to set up something in VPC. And those same solutions engineers that can help you add additional features, they can also help you replicate the infrastructure setup that we have to get the same scale, or go beyond it to, you know, have whatever scale you'd like. And then another question from Kevin, you can process images, yes. And are these embedded, stored in the same vector database as text or a separate database? So right now, the way that the workflows are set up, everything will go to, one or multiple destinations through that workflow. And so those embeddings will be, in some cases, those will be of like an image caption. I found use cases where that was really helpful to be embedded along with the original image in the base64 encoding. You can also, I have an example notebook. That's one of my team developed that has those images then pulled from a different database. So you can store images in a separate database and then easily reference them. And then we also have Titan multimodal embeddings via Amazon Bedrock. So those are going to be embeddings for images and text. And so those would be stored in the same database. Oh, I actually haven't tried Titan, so Kevin, I can pass the next question to Rob and Roman, and I'll share a notebook where we're just using two different databases, one that has images, one that has the embeddings, and that can kind of help you do multimodal RAG generation. And then Rob and Roman, if you see in the chat, Oliver followed up on the question about prompt injection. Yes, for example, if someone embedded some hidden malicious text within a PDF or email that gets added to the RAG. Let me know
Yeah,
if you have any
did we
insights into
answer
that.
did we answer the prior question about scaling?
We can, if you want to add more to that, then great. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm good. Cool. Just making sure. Yeah, Oliver. Right, keep me honest here, Roman, because you're involved in some of these things a little bit more closely than I am. I think this is the difference between like system prompt and user prompt. That's like one of the ways you can isolate some of this indirect um, prompt injection.
Yeah, but I'm also like not super involved with like the prompt work, but is this like if there was malicious information in your source,
Yeah.
like how to, and I mean, in that sense, we do have like plugins that have like, filtering logic and like things like, so theoretically, if there's a way to detect that ahead of time, we could introduce that logic before it even gets to the prompt. But I don't personally know of a way to like avoid that if it already gets to the prompt plugin.
Yeah, I mean, some of it depends upon which model we're using for like if we're using like a VLM partitioner, then it's actually looking with human vision at things and processing it that way. So it may not even get prompted in that sense for the partition step. It'll be invisible to the humans, invisible to the machine as well.
That's true. Yeah.
So yeah, it's unfortunately this is not one size fits all answer to that. It's a hard problem.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, I'll just say, Kevin, I shared a notebook that has all the data in S3, for example, and shows you how to access the images as well. But this was kind of like a quick example we came up with on the DevRel side to help demonstrate that we are storing that base64 encoding as well. But I encourage you to reach out to our enterprise team. And I think this is, again, something that our solutions architect could, very quickly help add that little missing piece to the platform that's specific to your use case. And then similarly to Atenya, the KPIs and metrics for the success of our solution in connecting unstructured data to GenAI, our enterprise team has a very long rubric of criteria that they provide to folks doing proof of concept that help them evaluate whether or not it succeeded. So they have that information. I helped them make sure that it was kind of matching what I saw broadly in GenAI to help evaluate. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining. This has been, as always, a very lively discussion. Thanks for joining our webinar. We do these pretty much every week. So Feel free to join more if there's more topics that interest you. And thanks so much to Rob and Roman for joining and helping me answer questions. Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.